Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back in time, way, way back, to a world where sand dunes could swallow cities, and gold flowed so freely it was weighed in handfuls. But don't pack a winter coat. You're crossing the Sahara Desert now, and it opens before you like an oven door. Dry, shimmering, endless. The kind of place where your lips crack before you can say hydration, and your sandals feel like they've been dipped in lava. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And go ahead, post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, grain by grain, along one of the oldest highways in history. No asphalt, no rest stops, just camel tracks worn into the bones of the earth. The heat has shape here. It presses against your skin, tugs at your lungs, and hisses from the rocks like they're trying to talk you out of this. But you're not alone. Around you, a caravan stretches for miles. Dozens of camels, merchants with dust-wrapped faces, and that one donkey who always walks like he has opinions. This is the salt route, threading from the great Tagaza mines through the Sahel and deep into the heart of West Africa. It's hard to imagine now, but this was once a corridor of laughter and luxury. Traders didn't just carry salt, they carried stories. Gold glinted in their saddlebags, saffron and cloth bundled in reed baskets, and under their breath, jokes, complaints, songs sung to pass the burning time. You sip from a leather water skin. It tastes faintly of goat and desert. Delightful. Mainstream historians agree that by the 11th century, this trans-Saharan network had become the economic backbone of powerful kingdoms like Ghana and Mali. Salt caravans moved in great loops, connecting the Mediterranean world to the lush interiors of sub-Saharan Africa. And they didn't just move goods, they moved ideas, music, languages, and yes, some very questionable jokes. One fringe theory suggests traders developed regional senses of humor based on how long their routes were. Short-haul merchants leaned toward sarcastic one-liners. Long-haul desert folk favored slow-burning stories with absurd punchlines, mostly because it took 4 days to get to the funny part. As night falls, your caravan circles up. Fires flicker to life. Someone begins strumming a ngoni, the strings humming against the wind. Another merchant, gray-bearded and barefoot, starts telling a tale about a camel that refused to carry salt unless it was sung to. Everyone laughs. You're not sure if it's the heat, the rhythm, or just exhaustion, but you laugh too. And in that moment, the Sahara softens. You're not crossing a wasteland. You're riding through a comedy club stretched over 200 miles. You wake before the sun, tucked against a saddlebag that smells like thyme and cured leather. The stars are fading, and somewhere behind a dune, someone is already boiling tea. Not just any tea either. This is gunpowder green, brewed dark and poured from a height that says, "I've done this in a sandstorm." You stretch your arms and listen as the caravan creaks to life. Camels groan dramatically, possibly rehearsed. Merchants grumble about sand in places sand should never go. And the old man from last night is already cracking a joke about how his first wife ran off with a salt block, and it still lasted longer than their marriage. This is how you survive the Sahara, with hooves and humor. The caravan moves like a procession of boats on a silent sea. Camels sway, shadows stretch. The horizon doesn't change, but somehow you feel progress. The path is instinct now, beaten into memory by generations of traders who mapped the desert not with ink, but with stories. Mainstream historians often marvel at the scale of these caravans, some with thousands of camels, each carrying up to 300 pounds of salt. Salt that came from the dry bones of Tagaza, where miners worked barefoot in pits that shimmered white like snow. And in exchange? Gold. Lots of it. West Africa's rivers, especially around Bambouk and Bure, were thick with gold dust, so common in some places that it was used to pay taxes or line tunics. But it wasn't all solemn trade. Oh no. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some caravans had designated joke tellers. Not official titles exactly, but agreed-upon roles. One merchant might carry the spices, another the gossip, and one poor soul, blessed with a crooked grin and a good memory, kept everyone from going mad in the sand. He'd walk backward at times just to tell his tales to the rear guard. Sometimes he'd do voices, bad ones, purposefully. Humor wasn't decoration, it was strategy. In a place where the wind could strip flesh and the days blurred into melted hours, laughter was resistance. It was the small rebellion that said, "Yes, we're boiling alive. But did you hear the one about the Tuareg who tried to salt a lion?" You walk beside a tall camel with a personality. You can tell by how he looks at you, judgmentally, like you didn't load your own bags properly. His handler calls him Kofi, claims he once refused to walk unless he was told a story first. So now, every morning, the man tells Kofi a tale. About what? Doesn't matter. It's the ritual. Camels love routine and drama. You pause at midday under a narrow scrap of shade. A palm tree, somehow alive. Water is ladled slowly. Everyone drinks in silence. And then, like clockwork, someone makes a joke about how the palm tree probably charges rent. The laughter is lazy, slow to start, but it spreads. Historians still argue whether these trading caravans were more transactional or communal. Did each trader work solo, or did they pool resources? Some records point to cooperative agreements, shared costs, shared risk. Others suggest strict individualism. What we know for certain is this: they shared jokes, shared songs, shared little human things that outlasted the ledgers. As the sun slides toward the west, you spot the shimmer of stone, a town ahead. Maybe not yet a city, but a place with walls, wells, and dates, sweet enough to make you forget how badly you need a bath. You arrive by evening. The caravan peels off. Salt is unloaded. Gold dust is weighed. But in one corner, by a lantern-lit tent, a circle has already formed. The joke teller has taken off his shoes. That means it's going to be a long one tonight. You sit cross-legged in the warm hush of the outpost, your legs coated in a thin crust of salt and sand, your ears tuned to the rhythm of nighttime storytelling. The joke teller is midway through a tale about a camel, a broken scale, and a very confused scribe from Cairo. No one interrupts. The moon's risen high, casting a silver glow over baskets of salt neatly stacked beside coils of rope and woven mats. This, somehow, is the exact right place to hear a story. But before we dive too deep into camels with opinions and desert one-liners, it's time to understand why everyone is working so hard for a chunk of something that makes your fries taste better. Salt, in medieval West Africa, wasn't seasoning. It was currency, medicine, preservation, and yes, power. You lean your head back against a bag of millet and try to imagine life without refrigeration, where food spoiled in a day and bodies wilted faster than melons in the sun. Salt kept things alive. Meat, vegetables, even trade routes. Mainstream historians are unanimous. Salt wasn't just a luxury, it was a lifeline. Entire economies were built around it. In the Sahel and Sahara, where salt was scarce and sweat flowed like spring water, slabs of salt, called amole, were transported by camel, traded for gold, ivory, and grain, and even used to pay soldiers. Some kings had vaults lined with it. And then there's gold. In the forests and river valleys of what is now Ghana, Mali, and Guinea, gold dust ran so plentiful that children played with it. It wasn't always minted or melted. It was weighed in gourds and scooped with spoons. But it had one major flaw. You can't eat gold. You can't sweat it out. You can't rub it into a wound and expect to feel better. But salt? Salt was immediate. And so, two worlds, one with too much salt, one with too much gold, met in the middle. Literally. You rise at dawn with the caravan again. The laughter lingers from last night, but the work returns quickly. Slabs are counted, gold weighed on hand scales that creak like old knees. The exchange is almost ritualistic. One merchant pours gold dust onto a ceramic plate, smoothing it with a flat stick. The other runs a dry finger over the salt slab, checking for cracks, tasting a corner with the dignity of a wine critic. Then they nod. No need for handshakes. The deal is done. Quirky detail? In some regions, they broke salt into standard shapes to make trade easier. Bricks, cones, even crude fish shapes. A few were stamped with clan symbols. Others were marked with a line down the middle so they could be split if necessary. Half a slab for a sack of rice, a third for goat cheese, 2 pieces, and a joke for a bolt of imported cloth. Fringe theory? One traveler's journal claims that in certain border regions, jokes were used as bargaining tools. If 2 traders couldn't agree on a price, each would take turns telling a joke. If one made the other laugh first, he got the better deal. It sounds like nonsense, but then again, this is a place where humor has always been treated like currency. Historians still debate just how valuable salt was in comparison to gold. Some records claim 1 salt slab could fetch its weight in gold. Others suggest the value fluctuated wildly based on region, rainfall, and, of course, rumor. What's clear is that no one walked away from the deal empty-handed. Not in Tagaza, not in Kumbisala, not in the towns scattered like seeds across the Sahel. As you mount your camel again, the slab of salt carefully tied beneath your saddle creaks slightly. You pat it, like it's a travel companion. The sun climbs slowly, as if unsure whether to scorch or shine. You ride on, salt in your bags, dust in your shoes, and laughter still stuck in your throat. By late morning, the landscape begins to shimmer again, flat, white, and blinding. For a moment you think it's snow. Then your skin reminds you, quite rudely, that it is not. This is Taghaza, and it's made almost entirely of salt. Yes, you heard that right. Walls of salt, roofs of salt, even the mosque. Salt bricks, packed and stacked under a thatch roof to keep it from melting in the sun. You squint at the outline of a building. There's a glint where the wall has chipped. Clean white crystal, like someone built the town from ice cubes in time. Welcome to the weirdest mining town in the desert. Taghaza was once the salt capital of the trans-Saharan trade. Not a city in the traditional sense. There were no fruit markets, no palm groves, no poets scrawling verses about love in the margins of tax ledgers. Just miners. Salt and wind. Mainstream historians agree that Taghaza played a central role in supplying salt to West Africa during the height of the gold salt trade. Located deep in what is now northern Mali, this barren outpost was a working town, not a living one. Salt was hacked from pits by enslaved laborers, who chipped away under the scorching sun and slept in huts made from the very slabs they harvested. And yes, there were jokes. Because there had to be. One surviving traveler's account from the 14th century describes how miners used gallows humor to survive their brutal workdays. They gave the pits sarcastic nicknames like the King's Bathtub or the Dry Ocean. One pit, deeper and darker than the rest, was called Kefi's Mouth, after a foreman who reportedly hadn't smiled in a decade. Naturally, it became the site of the rowdiest jokes. Fringe tidbit. Some say that when a new miner joined the crew, the initiation wasn't formal. He simply had to make the others laugh. Not laugh like a chuckle, belly laugh. If you could do that, you were in. If not, well, you just had to dig faster. Despite the hardship, there was a rhythm to the place. Caravans came and went. Salt was cut, stacked, and loaded. Meals were eaten in the shade of salt walls. And when the wind picked up, carrying fine salt dust into your mouth, your ears, your everything, you'd lean into it and make a joke about how you were halfway cured for storage. You step carefully through the ruins now, the salt crunching under your sandals. The structures are mostly collapsed, but here and there you see the outline of rooms, squares and rectangles that once held men and meals and ledgers, and the occasional snoozing camel. One low hut has carvings on the inner wall, rough linework of a stick figure leading what looks like a salt block on a leash. Pet salt? Or minor humor? You decide not to ask. There was no water in Taghaza. Everything had to be brought in: food, drink, wood for fires, shade when possible. But the salt? That was endless. A white sea buried in the earth, layered and ancient, waiting to be carved up and carried south. Historians still argue whether Taghaza was ever meant to be a settlement or simply a working station. There were no families, no gardens, no wells. But trade records show it flourished for centuries, reliant on systems that brought people in, broke their backs, and paid them in gold or goats, depending on the season. You rest briefly near a low pile of collapsed salt slabs. The air here doesn't move. It just sits, heavy with stillness and old sweat. Ardashir, yes, he's with you again now, somehow, passes you a strip of dried meat. It tastes like it was marinated in the sun and ambition. Taghaza, he says with a wry grin, where even your pillow stings your face. And you laugh, because that's what they did here too. You leave Taghaza behind as the wind begins to pick up again, this time not cruel, just persistent, like an old ant trying to clean sand from your ears. The salt town disappears behind you, a white smudge against an endless horizon. And ahead? The land starts to change. You descend gradually into the Sahel, the belt between Sahara and Savannah, where the air softens and color begins to return to the earth. There are trees again, scruffy ones at first, and then fuller canopies with birds that do not care what kind of epic journey you're on. One of them squawks at your camel. Your camel looks deeply offended. You're following the trail of gold now, not metaphorical riches, but the very real kind. Nuggets, dust, even flakes brushed from riverbanks and swirled in wooden pans. You make your way toward one of the richest places in West African history, the goldfields of Bambouk and Bure. The river is wide and brown, its surface thick with sunlight. People gather along the edges, dipping pans, rinsing gravel, watching for a shimmer. You crouch beside a boy who's no older than 10. His pan glints suddenly, and there it is. A sliver of gold, no bigger than a breadcrumb. He grins, shrugs, and moves on. Just another Tuesday. Mainstream historians recognize this region as the source of much of the gold that fueled the Ghana and later Mali empires. Unlike the deep shaft mines of other ancient civilizations, much of West Africa's gold came from alluvial deposits, meaning it could be gathered from riverbeds, sifted from sand, washed from the earth like some sort of miracle. And yet, no one thought of gold as sacred. Valuable? Absolutely. But people here laughed about it too. Fringe detail. Some traders claimed the locals joked that gold was just heavy dust, and that a clever cook could trade a fine meal for a spoonful if the stew was good enough. There's a story, half legend, of a merchant who tried to weigh a chicken against gold, and lost both when the bird panicked and knocked the scale into the river. The chicken survived. The gold didn't. The joke, apparently, was told in every market for 100 miles. Don't trust a chicken with wealth. Here, gold wasn't hoarded in vaults. It was traded, worn, offered as tribute. Kings kept it, sure, but so did farmers. It moved like gossip, quickly, brightly, and with just a hint of exaggeration. You arrive at a bustling riverside market where gold is exchanged for nearly everything: iron tools, glass beads, cloth, horses, and, yes, salt. You watch a woman haggle with a merchant over the price of smoked fish. She offers a pouch of gold dust. He eyes it suspiciously, pinches some between his fingers, and sniffs it. She raises an eyebrow and says something that makes everyone around laugh. You don't catch the words, but the tone is clear. You really think I'd fake gold for fish? The laughter floats into the air like music. Historians still argue how organized these gold economies were. Did kings control the supply strictly, or did families trade freely? Were the weights standard? Did anyone ever try to salt their gold, literally? The answers are debated, but everyone agrees on this. The gold flowed, and where it flowed, salt followed. You trail the market path, stepping carefully around baskets of kola nuts, carved wooden stools, and calabashes full of sour milk. You overhear snippets of jokes, bits of song, teasing banter about price and quality. A boy throws a pebble at a goat. The goat kicks over a basket of millet. No one's angry. It's all part of the rhythm. You sit for a while near the river, watching the sunlight play on the water like gold waiting to be caught. Somewhere behind you, someone begins telling the chicken story again. The punchline is delivered louder this time. The crowd groans, then laughs anyway, and you smile. Because in this place, wealth is measured not just by dust and slabs, but by how often you can laugh while trading them. You leave the riverside market just as the sun begins to lower itself into a bowl of orange haze. Dust rises in little puffs around your sandals. Somewhere behind you, someone's still bartering over a donkey with slightly suspicious knees. But ahead, the landscape opens into gently rolling plains, dotted with villages, and just beyond, something grand. An outline of walls, towers, and distant drums. You're entering the domain of kings now, one of the great cities of the Ghana Empire, though we don't know exactly which. Names get blurry when written in dust, but the feeling is unmistakable. This place hums with wealth, order, and a kind of regal chaos. Drums beat out messages from one gate to another. Couriers sprint like poetry across the courtyards. And under open tents, people recline on mats and argue about rice prices, philosophy, and whose cousin told the worst joke at last week's wedding. You're ushered toward the palace, though palace might be a generous word. It's a massive structure, yes, but made of sun-dried mud bricks, timber beams, and thatched roofs woven so tightly you could bounce a baobab fruit off them. The walls are painted with geometric designs in white and red ochre. Everything feels alive. Mainstream historians describe these royal complexes as both political centers and vibrant community hubs. Kings didn't rule from thrones atop marble staircases. They ruled from within their people. They held court beneath the open sky, surrounded by advisors, warriors, market chiefs, and the occasional court jester. Yes, really. Quirky detail? West African kings, especially in Ghana and Mali, often retained griots, poet-historians who also happened to be experts in satire, wordplay, and the kind of slow-burn jokes that could make or break a morning. A good griot didn't just recite history. He delivered it with flair, with side-eye, with comedy. His role wasn't to amuse the king. It was to remind him, gently, when he was acting like a goat in a crown. You settle in behind a crowd as a griot performs. He's dressed in layers of cloth, patterned like riverbeds and fire. His voice rises and falls like song. He's telling the story of a king who tried to weigh his own ego in gold and lost. The crowd roars at the punchline. Even the king, seated beneath a fringed parasol, shakes his head and grins. This is power, but not the cold, distant kind. Here, royalty is woven into the laughter. Fringe theory? Some historians believe jokes were used as subtle diplomatic tools. If a visiting envoy brought tense news, the griot might open with a story that poked fun at all kings equally, diffusing the tension opening space for honest talk. It was humor as foreign policy, a well-timed jab at the absurdity of human ego could change the outcome of a negotiation. Later that evening, you wander the city's outer districts. Clay homes glow with lamplight. Markets still buzz. A group of children are drawing in the dust with sticks, sketching what you realize is a camel falling into a salt pit. It's wildly anatomically incorrect and also hilarious. One boy adds speech bubbles. "I told you, Abdul, this is not a shortcut." You find a quiet spot beneath a mango tree and sit. A woman nearby is telling a story to her daughter, something about a greedy merchant who tried to trade fake salt for real gold and got stuck in a thunderstorm of angry goats. The daughter giggles wildly. You're not sure how much she understands. Maybe none of it. Maybe all of it. Historians still debate how structured West African courts were. Did griots memorize official records or invent tales on the fly? Were jokes sanctioned or spontaneous? One 14th century traveler noted that no truth is spoken until the laughter dies, suggesting the two were always tied together. The stars begin to show. Drums fade into background murmur. And you begin to realize that this laughter, these jokes pass through markets, courts, and moonlit porches, isn't distraction. It's architecture. It's how empires hold themselves up. The morning light spreads slow and wide over the red earth, soaking the market in gold before the traders arrive. You rise early with the hum of the city still resting in your bones, walking beneath woven awnings that haven't yet been rolled up. The stalls are quiet for now, but soon, the silent market will awaken. Yes, silent market. And no, it's not because anyone forgot to unmute themselves. You follow a narrow alley until it opens into a flat clearing marked with stone boundaries. Merchants are already arriving, each with goods carefully laid out. Slabs of salt, bundles of cloth, ivory, spices, and gourds sealed with beeswax. They set them down and step back, sitting or standing a few feet away. No one speaks. You've stumbled into one of the most curious and whispered about features of medieval West African trade, the silent barter. Described in detail by early Arab travelers and corroborated by griot legends, this form of exchange was practiced between groups who didn't share a common language or didn't share much trust. Mainstream historians confirm the use of silent trade, especially between the Soninka people of the Ghana Empire and Berber, or Arab traders from the north. The process was almost ceremonial. One group would arrive first, lay out goods, and depart to a safe distance. Then, the second group would approach, examine the offerings, leave their counter-offer, and step away. If the original group accepted, they took the goods. If not, they walked away, and the whole negotiation looped again. No words, no arguments, just silence, salt, and gold. You crouch behind a merchant who watches the market with the focus of a chess master. A pile of his gold dust lies in a shallow bowl beside a block of salt. Nearby, a woman from the other party nods slowly, then adjusts her offer. 2 small bundles of indigo-dyed cloth instead of 1. Still, no one speaks. Fringe tidbit? Some accounts suggest that traders used body language and exaggerated expressions to negotiate silently. Eye rolls, dramatic shrugs, even very pointed slow blinks. Others claim that some traders left humorous objects, a carved monkey face, a badly drawn camel, as passive-aggressive feedback on poor offers. You watch as one man places a tiny clay figurine next to a bowl of dates. It's clearly a joke. The figure has giant ears and a droopy nose. Someone stifles a laugh. The other trader stares at it for a moment, and then sweetens the deal with a second bowl of dates. Negotiation, sealed with silence and sarcasm. There's something meditative about it all. The absence of haggling makes the noises around you feel sacred. The crunch of feet, the rustle of woven baskets, the soft murmur of cloth on stone. Without shouting or bargaining, you notice the rhythm of trust, the dance of trade that transcends speech. Historians still argue how widespread silent markets were. Some believe they were only used at border zones. Others suggest they were more symbolic, a kind of theater to reinforce the value of peace and mutual respect. One particularly romantic theory claims that the silent market was less about language and more about mood, a way to acknowledge that commerce could be gentle, even sacred. As the sun climbs, the pace quickens. Offers are accepted, goods exchanged. Still no words. You sit quietly, holding a small carved talisman a boy handed you with a wink. It's a turtle made from soapstone, with a tiny smile carved into its shell. It feels like the perfect souvenir, not because it cost gold, but because it cost nothing. Just presence and patience and a little shared absurdity. And when the market finally begins to dissolve into footsteps and camels and murmuring farewells, you realize no one really needed to speak. The joke had already landed. And the trade? Fair, as always. You're back on the road again. A slow, winding track that dances between baobab shadows and clusters of sun-baked stones. The caravan has reformed, slightly smaller now, with trades completed and goods reshuffled. A few merchants have returned north. Others, like you, continue eastward, toward cities you've heard whispered in firelit stories. The pace is relaxed today. The camels aren't protesting, and the donkeys, well, the donkeys never agree, but they're at least walking in the correct direction. And then you hear it. Not talking, not yelling, but singing. Somewhere behind you, two traders are tossing verses back and forth like a ball. One sings a line about the dust in his sandals, and the other replies with a rhyme about losing his last good sandal to a goat with an attitude problem. The rhyme is terrible. The crowd loves it. Welcome to the world of trading song duels. Mainstream historians often focus on logistics. How far the camels walked, how heavy the salt slabs were, how many days it took to reach Gao or Jenne. But less is said about the entertainment that stitched those miles together. Because let's be honest, walking through a desert for 10 hours a day while carrying salt is not inherently riveting. So the traders made it fun. They sang, they joked, they played games with words, rhythm, and rhyme. It wasn't just for amusement. It was how you kept morale, preserved memory, and occasionally insulted your travel companions without getting punched. Quirky detail? These song duels weren't always in full voice. Some were done in murmurs during rest stops. Others were whispered between tents at night. A few were sung at camels, usually as revenge for biting someone's turban. There are documented cases where entire verses were devoted to describing exactly how dramatic a single camel could be. Fringe theory? Some griots believed these impromptu songs helped sharpen a trader's bargaining skills. If you could improvise a rhyme about a broken saddle, you could definitely haggle over 3 extra ounces of gold dust. One legend even tells of a merchant who negotiated an entire sale through rhyme and was never seen speaking again. Total myth, obviously, but also, maybe not. You join the rhythm, listening more than participating. One trader, grinning beneath a faded blue scarf, sings, "My salt is dry, my knees are bent, I sold my shoes and paid my rent." Another responds, "Your shoes were bad, your rent's a guess, you owe that camel an apology no less." The caravan howls with laughter. The path weaves gently between low ridges, and for a while, the music fades. Then another starts again. This time, 2 young traders perform a kind of call-and-response history lesson. One reciting the kings of Mali, the other chiming in with made-up flaws. Sundiata walked with lions, but he couldn't cook rice. Mansa Musa spread gold across the sea. Then he got lost looking for tea. It's nonsense. It's hilarious. It's also learning. Historians still debate how much oral tradition traveled with these caravans. Were they just songs? Or were they records? Some believe certain trading families passed down entire lineages, roots, and price histories through music, coded in lyrics only they could understand. If true, these weren't just songs. They were libraries. As dusk creeps in, the music softens. Traders hum. Camels grunt. You hear the last line of a verse drift into silence. Gold is heavy, salt is square, but jokes are light and ride the air. You smile, jotting that down in your mind like a souvenir. A memory. A lesson. Because in this caravan, the rhythm of the road isn't marked by steps. It's marked by punchlines. The next morning, you wake to the sound of wooden drums echoing through the compound walls. Not war drums, but announcement drums. The kind that say something important is about to happen, probably involving robes, chairs, and long pauses between statements. You've reached a city again, one that serves as a regional capital, equal parts marketplace, courthouse, and theatrical stage. The walls are tall and mud-smooth, brushed with white and red paint in careful patterns that catch the light. In the distance, beneath a wide canopy, a small crowd is already forming around a raised platform. A griot steps forward, not one of the trading song duelist types, but a full court performer, draped in embroidered cloth and jangling with bangles. His hair is coiled in rings, his voice is precise, and his smile, permanent. This is not just a historian, this is the court comedian. Court. Mainstream historians tend to emphasize the role of griots as genealogists, praise singers, and keepers of collective memory. But in many royal courts of medieval West Africa, especially in Mali and Songhai, griots also served as licensed jesters, trusted enough to mock the king, clever enough not to overdo it. You take your seat beside a merchant chewing dried dates and smirking in anticipation. The griot begins, not with a story, but with a stare, eyes sweeping over the crowd, eyebrows bouncing like fishhooks, daring someone to speak. Then, with a voice like a kettle boiling, he launches into a tale. A king once asked his griot, "Tell me the secret to wisdom." The griot answered, "Avoid asking me that while wearing your night robe." The crowd roars. The king in the story is fictional, of course, or maybe not. Quirky detail? These court jesters, sometimes referred to as fool griots in European traveler accounts, were often part of elite families themselves. Their role was hereditary, and their training began young. They learned not just music and memory, but timing, mimicry, and tactful insult. The kind that lands like a breeze, not a slap. Fringe theory? Some suggest these comic griots played a subtle political role, acting as pressure valves in highly stratified societies. When criticism was dangerous, a joke could sneak it past the guards. One record tells of a griot who pantomimed a corrupt tax collector so effectively that the ruler fired the man that afternoon, all without a word of accusation. You watch as the performer moves through impressions. A camel merchant who can't count, a soldier whose sword is too shiny to use, a noble who forgets his own titles. The crowd is rapt. Even the local governor, seated under a parasol flanked by two palm frond waving assistants, is trying to hide a grin. The griot ends with a bow so low it nearly becomes a nap, then leaps upright and exits the stage with a flourish. Applause is quiet, polite handclaps and nods. The crowd disperses, not because they're bored, but because they're satisfied. You wander the city afterward, past rows of workshops, tanneries, weavers, and spice sellers. It smells like heat and ambition. At one corner, two young boys are doing a griot impression, mocking a local guard's walk, complete with exaggerated shoulder rolls and squinted eyes. A woman nearby calls them over, tells them off with a wink, and hands them each a mango slice. The punishment for comedy is fruit. Historians still argue whether these comic traditions should be seen as satire, education, or pure performance. Some say they were built into the structure of society, others that they evolved as a form of resistance from below. But one thing is certain, laughter was protected here, not just allowed, expected. Because even kings need someone to tell them when their crown is on sideways. By the time you leave the city gates, the road is filled with sound. Not drums or camels this time, but laughter echoing from a group of travelers ahead. They're clustered around a tall woman with a walking staff and a voice that cuts clean through the chatter. She's telling a story about a salt merchant who fell asleep in his own cart and accidentally got sold to a fishmonger. Apparently, the moral is, don't nap next to your inventory. You catch up just in time for the punchline. It lands perfectly. The group erupts in that slow, warm laughter that travels well. You've met a traveling griot, a female oral historian, humorist, and keeper of local lore. Unlike court-based griots, griots often roamed between towns, sometimes alone, sometimes as part of a troupe. They weren't just singers, they were social glue. Mainstream historians recognize the griot tradition as a cornerstone of West African oral culture. Though often overlooked in male-centered chronicles, these women played vital roles in preserving genealogies, mediating disputes, and, quite often, telling everyone what fools they were being, nicely, of course. You fall into step beside her. Her name is Fama. Her earrings are large, her laugh even larger. She doesn't ask your name. She gives you one. Walker who nods too much. You accept this with grace. Quirky detail? In some regions, griots were believed to possess joking kinship, a kind of sanctioned teasing license with members of specific clans or castes. This allowed them to say things others couldn't. If someone was acting greedy, the griot might say, "He counts gold like his mother counts goats," too loud, and with both eyes closed. People would laugh. The tension would dissolve. Fama tells you about a wedding feast where she once stalled the ceremony by pretending the bride's dowry was missing. She made up a fake receipt and read it aloud. One goat with commitment issues, 3 loud uncles, and a broom that sweeps secrets under the rug. The bride howled. The groom wept with laughter. The marriage, she claims, has lasted to this day. Fringe theory? Some anthropologists argue that griots served not just as entertainers, but as emotional regulators. Their presence could soften transitions, ease grief, or uplift a struggling village. In this sense, they weren't comic relief. They were cultural therapists. History with a wink. As the road bends east, you all stop for rest near a shallow well. Water is passed around. Fama pulls out a battered drum and begins to tap a rhythm. Slow, thoughtful. Then she sings a short call and response, inviting others to chime in. You try. Badly. She laughs. Walker, who nods too much, also sings off-key, she says. The group approves. You rest beneath an acacia tree as shadows stretch long across the path. Fama begins another tale, this time about a greedy trader who tried to stretch a salt slab by painting it white. The paint melted. His clothes turned pink. The moral? Don't fake salt or fashion. The stars arrive early. You lie back, head on your travel pack, listening to the rhythms of stories, feet, wind. Someone hums. Someone else snores. A camel sighs like a disappointed parent. Historians still argue how influential griots were compared to their male counterparts. But in towns across Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and beyond, their voices were etched into memory. Not as background music, but as narrators of the human mess. And if you're lucky, you'll remember Fama's voice years from now, half memory, half music, telling you, if you must carry salt, bring jokes. The sun rises gently, as if it knows today doesn't require urgency. You wake to the scent of millet porridge cooking over a low flame, and the rhythmic brushing sound of someone sweeping dust that will, inevitably, return in an hour. The caravans gathered again, though smaller still. Some traders have veered south, others west. But your path leads toward one of the most celebrated cities of the medieval West African world, Timbuktu. Yes, it's real. And no, it's not just the punchline to a geography joke. As you approach, the city rises like a mirage that decided to stick around. Mud brick buildings with tapered towers, wooden beams jutting out like ribs, and rooftops thick with dust and conversation. The Songhai Mosque looms in the distance, less a building, more a sandcastle dreamt into permanence. Timbuktu wasn't just a trading hub. It was a university town, a paper city, a place where ideas passed hands as often as gold. Mainstream historians hail it as a center of Islamic learning, manuscript production, and scholarly debate. And yet it had jokes too. You wander the streets, following the scent of spiced tea and the sound of someone loudly accusing a neighbor's goat of having opinions. Children dart between alleys, and every third person seems to be carrying a book wrapped in cloth. You stop by a scholar's stall, yes, a stall, where books are displayed like fruit, stacked in wooden trays, titles handwritten in a dozen scripts. The scholar himself is scribbling on a wax tablet and laughing with a student who's just misquoted a proverb. Quirky detail? Many scholars in Timbuktu intentionally collected humorous misinterpretations of serious texts. They'd jot them down, share them with colleagues, and turn them into teaching tools. A famous joke went, "The camel of logic cannot sit on the mat of poetry." Nobody knows what it means. That's why it's funny. You're handed a manuscript to look at, a legal document from the 15th century regarding the proper use of salt during ceremonies. The marginalia includes doodles. One is a tiny drawing of a judge with a salt beard. The scholar chuckles and says, "The scribe was my great-uncle. He was very tired." Fringe theory? Some researchers believe Timbuktu scholars encoded jokes into legal or philosophical works, not as distractions, but as stress relief for future readers. It's hard to stay anxious about jurisprudence when someone's annotated the footnotes with a donkey pun. You make your way toward the edge of the university district, where a group of students is gathered under a fig tree, reciting verses in sing-song tones. One trips over a phrase and bursts into laughter. The others join in. The teacher, an elderly man with an eyebrow like a hawk's wing, smiles and says, "If you can laugh at knowledge, you'll never lose it." You sit with them a while. The fig tree offers speckled shade. A girl passes you a strip of dried mango. It tastes like sunlight preserved in leather. Historians still argue how much of Timbuktu's knowledge was preserved or lost, how many manuscripts survived colonial looting, fire, or sand. But they all agree, what lived here wasn't just scholarship, it was spirit. A spirit that understood the human brain learns best when it smiles. As the call to prayer echoes in the distance and the market begins its daily shuffle, you take a last look at the scholar's stall. He waves, holds up a page, and shouts, "Come back if you find my camel's thesis!" You probably won't, but you'll remember the joke. You leave Timbuktu with your head full of proverbs, mango-scented pages, and the vague sense that someone's camel has been working on a thesis for several years. The road southward curves gently now, hugging the edge of the Niger River like a lazy snake with no urgent plans. The land changes again, greener now, dotted with farming villages and wide fields where children race goats in circles just for the joy of winning against something vaguely cooperative. Your next stop is one of West Africa's most overlooked treasures, Djenné. Unlike the desert cities you've passed, Djenné rises out of wetlands, built on islands and peninsulas near the Niger's inland delta. It smells different here, of fish, wet earth, clay ovens, and market perfume that insists on lingering. And at the heart of it all, the Great Mosque of Djenné, the largest mud brick structure in the world. You arrive just as sunlight kisses its ridged towers, each capped with ostrich eggs that gleam like tiny moons. Mainstream historians admire the mosque as a triumph of Sudano-Sahelian architecture and a center of learning, much like Timbuktu. But unlike Timbuktu, Djenné had a reputation for hustle, gossip, and a particularly cheeky sense of humor. As you wander through the market square, you realize that everything here seems to come with a punchline. The fishmonger shouts, "My catfish sings better than your griot." The baker has stenciled a frown on every loaf of bread. Even the city guards are debating loudly about whether their spears would double as umbrellas. Quirky detail: Janae's masons, who maintain the mosque annually, were known for their theatrical flair. Each year during the Crépissage de la Grande Mosquée, the Grand Replastering Festival, the entire town joins in to recoat the mosque with fresh mud. But it's not just work, it's performance. There are chants, jokes, competitive mud throwing, and public roasts of whoever slips and falls. One year, a mason reportedly shouted, "This mud's better than my cousin's cooking." The cousin was in the crowd. The roast continues to this day. Fringe theory: some scholars believe the festival served not only a religious or architectural function but also a social reset. For one day, hierarchies softened. Merchants teased governors, children bossed adults around with mud buckets, and laughter turned maintenance into magic. You stroll through narrow alleys where murals bloom on the walls, some geometric, others suspiciously cartoonish. One corner features a mural of a donkey wearing scholar's robes. Below it, someone scrawled in Arabic script, "Wise but stubborn." You sip a spicy hibiscus drink from a calabash and sit near the riverbank, where a group of girls is braiding each other's hair while trading riddles. One girl asks, "What speaks in winter, sleeps in rain, and disappears when you look straight at it?" The others shout answers. None are correct. She grins and says, "It's your mother's opinion." They scream with laughter and start again. Historians still argue whether Jenne was more religious or commercial, whether its scholars rivaled Timbuktu's or whether its mosque was more symbolic than scholarly. But most agree, Jenne was animated by personality. A city that understood buildings needed not just walls, but voices. You leave at sunset, the mosque glowing like clay caught mid-laugh. And in your mind, you hear someone say, "If you slip in the mud, at least do it dancing." The road from Jenne winds gently through marshy stretches, thick with reeds and frogs that seem way too enthusiastic about life. Your feet squelch in places, and at least twice, you swear a goat has chuckled at your careful sidestepping. Soon, you're traveling with a new caravan, mostly fish traders, potters, and one man who claims to be a professional teller of wildly convincing lies. He says this without blinking. Everyone calls him Uncle Bio, though you're fairly sure he's nobody's uncle. He's also your new favorite person. Bio walks with a long stick, not because he needs it, but because it gives his stories punctuation. Every time he makes a point, he slaps the ground with it, and the donkeys behind him wince in what may or may not be theatrical solidarity. He tells tales of the joking relationships, an actual serious cultural tradition across much of West Africa, where certain families, clans, or ethnic groups are bound by custom to joke, tease, and mock one another in specific ritualized ways. Mainstream historians call this sanankuya, or joking kinship. It's not just social play. It's a system designed to diffuse conflict, ease tension, and build bridges. Two strangers from joking groups might immediately start teasing each other about bad cooking, stolen goats, or receding hairlines. Not insults, invitations. And the jokes? Scripted, sacred, ridiculous. You pass through a village where a local griot introduces herself as part of a joking lineage with a group from the north. She immediately calls their ancestors camel chasers with itchy knees. They respond by pretending to sniff her stew and faint from the smell. Everyone is delighted. Quirky detail? In some regions, people would even call their joking cousins by mock names like lazy goat wrangler or pot burner in chief. If an argument broke out between groups, someone would step in and remind them of their duty. You're supposed to mock, not fight. Fringe theory? Some anthropologists believe joking kinship evolved as a survival mechanism for diverse trading cultures. With so many groups interacting, Mande, Fulani, Songhai, Tuareg, a structured form of humor kept misunderstandings from turning into rivalries. It was conflict resolution by roast. Uncle Bayo, of course, claims it's because our ancestors were too busy being hilarious to fight properly. You camp under tall acacia trees that night. The stars crowd close and someone builds a fire. Bayo begins telling a story about a man who tried to trade his mother-in-law for a salt slab and ended up with a blind goat and a cursed cooking pot. The moral? If you don't like your in-laws, don't involve commerce. The group howls. Later, a quiet moment. Someone asks Bayo if he ever had a real job. He says, "I tried herding once, but the cows laughed at my singing." You're pretty sure that's the only true thing he's said all day. Historians still debate how far the joking kinship system extended, or whether it was ever formally codified. But even today, many families remember their joke relations and keep the tradition alive at weddings, funerals, and festivals. It's humor with purpose, an ancestral handshake made with words. You fall asleep with a smile, wrapped in the scent of wood smoke and laughter. Because here in the heart of old trade routes and old friendships, even tension has a punchline. You wake before dawn, the kind of hour when the moon still feels entitled to linger, and the frogs are only just finishing their nightly debate about absolutely nothing. The caravan's moving again, this time toward the southern fringes of the Sahel, where grasslands blur into forests and the air hums with insects, heat, and mystery. You're heading into the lands once touched by the kingdom of Mali, whose power radiated outward through gold, governance, and, yes, its reputation for being delightfully strange. At least, that's what the caravan says. Today, the road brings you to Kangaba, a small but sacred place often overshadowed by its flashier cousins like Niani or Timbuktu. But Kangaba is important, very important. It was the spiritual and political heart of the Mali Empire long before maps were a thing. And according to local griots, it's where the Keita dynasty began. The sun breaks over the hills as you approach the Kamablan, a circular mud brick structure with a conical thatched roof and thick wooden doors. You arrive just in time to witness something rare and ancient: the septennial re-roofing ceremony. Mainstream historians have written about this. Every 7 years, Kangaba's chiefs, griots, nobles, and community members gather to renew the Kamablan's roof. But this isn't just maintenance. It's an excuse to retell everything. Everything. Genealogies, battles, embarrassing royal mistakes, scandals involving goats. It's a 7-year backlog of gossip dressed up as history, and everyone's here for it. A griot stands before the crowd. His voice is gravel and silk. The great-grandfather of our chief once tried to invent invisible clothes, he says, dead serious. We still don't talk about that festival. The crowd erupts. Quirky detail. During the re-roofing, griots are allowed and expected to poke fun at noble families. One griot begins reciting the names of ancestors and casually inserts, "And Fanta the Fearful, who once ran from a chicken and never explained why." The noble family in question? Laughing harder than anyone. This isn't disrespect. It's ritual humility, a reminder that all greatness has an underside, and even empires must laugh at themselves every now and then. Fringe theory? Some scholars argue that the Kamablan ceremony was Mali's version of a constitutional review, oral, theatrical, and filled with comedy. While Western systems used parchments, the Keita line used punchlines. The idea being, if you can laugh about your past, you're probably ready for your future. You're pulled into the crowd, handed a calabash of ginger drink so spicy it slaps your sinuses into next week, and told to listen properly. A griot begins a tale about how Sundiata Keita, the empire's founder, once lost a bet with his sister over who could cook better millet cakes. Apparently, she won by hiding honey inside the dough. To this day, it's still considered a political metaphor, somehow. The ceremony ends with laughter, music, and a group of elders waving burning incense in patterns that look suspiciously like letters. One griot mutters, "We're trying to send smoke signals to our ancestors. They haven't replied since last Tuesday." You spend the evening seated beneath the shadow of the Kamablan, watching as stars flicker on like gossip starting fresh. The roof above you is new, but the jokes? Ancient. Historians still puzzle over why Kangaba never grew into a sprawling city like its cousins. But perhaps its role was never to expand, only to remind, to anchor memory in humor, humility, and shared ritual. You wrap your shawl tighter as the night cools, and as someone hums a melody about salt, marriage, and donkeys who overpromise, you realize, in this place, the past isn't written in stone. It's giggled through the roof beams. You've barely left Kangaba before the rain begins, not the sideways apocalyptic kind, but a warm, persistent drizzle that paints every leaf with a shimmer and turns the red dirt road into a soft clay ribbon. Your sandals squish, your sleeves cling. A donkey behind you audibly sighs, but no one complains. Because this is blessing rain, the sort that brings relief after long, dry spells, and the sort that makes villages buzz with life, steam, and suspiciously cheerful ducks. You reach a low cluster of homes, just as the drizzle pauses, and you're immediately invited into a courtyard where women are gathered around pots, cloth, and bundles of something that smells earthy and sharp. You've stumbled into a dying circle. This is no back-alley tie-dye operation. These women are masters of the indigo craft, a tradition that goes back centuries and once made West African cloth as sought after as gold. In the medieval Mali Empire, indigo-dyed fabrics were worn by nobility, traded across the Sahara, and, according to one legend, used as passive-aggressive status symbols in marriage disputes. Mainstream historians agree that indigo was a central feature of Sahelian commerce. The leaves of the indigofera plant were fermented in clay pits, turned into thick dye paste, and then beaten, soaked, and massaged into cloth until the fabric turned midnight blue. It was hard work, and it required jokes. You're handed a strip of cloth and told to beat it like it insulted your cooking. A woman beside you laughs so hard she snorts into her elbow. Quirky detail? In some villages, dying apprentices had to compose songs to the indigo pits. One famous line goes, "Oh, blue pot, reveal your mood, don't stain like your auntie's stew." If the color came out wrong, it wasn't the process, it was the cloth being stubborn, or the apprentice forgetting to sing. Fringe theory? Some anthropologists suggest that indigo pits were considered semi-magical, almost spiritual. The dye was alive, moody, and responsive to human emotion. If you were sour, your cloth might streak. If you laughed, it shimmered. Science might not agree. The cloth makers absolutely do. The courtyard fills with banter as a grandmother tells a story about a cloth that once changed color mid-ceremony, exposing a secret marriage. No one confirms it. Everyone nods like it's gospel. As the fabrics are hung on lines to dry, they darken from green to purple to rich, impossible blue, deep as dusk, soft as midnight. A young girl pats your arm and says, "You didn't ruin it. That's rare for first tries." You're honored. And a little surprised. Later, as the courtyard clears, someone brings out a faded shawl stitched with cowrie shells and says it once belonged to a merchant who only wore indigo because it matched his mood and his debts. They laugh. Historians still argue whether these indigo dyeing guilds operated like formal workshops or loose family cooperatives, but all agree they were places of skill, memory, and expression. Women passed down not just techniques, but attitude. Every slap of cloth was a sentence, every color a message. You walk away wearing a scarf that still smells faintly of dye, steam, and crushed leaves. And with each step, it feels like your own story has picked up a new thread, woven between jokes, soaked in history, and dyed in laughter. You leave the indigo courtyard with your new scarf tucked neatly over your shoulder, feeling, if not stylish, then at least a little more textile literate. The road ahead curves into hilly country, where trees grow taller and shadows fall cooler. Birds call in lazy loops overhead, and a breeze carries the smell of something baking, possibly yams, possibly mischief. You follow the sound of drums, not war drums, not marketplace drums, festival drums. The tempo is jubilant, each beat skipping like it's on its way to a punchline. You've arrived just in time for a mask festival. Here, in one of the many Manda-speaking villages that dot the southern stretch of the old empire, men and women gather in a dusty field near the village edge. There's music, sure, but also masks. Dozens of them. Some tall and lean, others squat and blocky. One looks suspiciously like a goat with opinions. Another? Possibly a commentary on marriage, but it's hard to say. Mainstream historians agree that masquerade traditions are some of the most iconic and complex forms of artistic and spiritual expression in West Africa. Rooted in religious, social, and political life, masks were more than decoration. They were vessels, channels for spirits, social commentary in three-dimensional form. You're handed a wooden rattle and gently told not to stand in front of the leaping mask unless you want to get lightly bruised by history. Good advice. Quirky detail? Some masks are meant to dance badly on purpose. There's a character known in some traditions as the fumbler, a spirit who trips, forgets steps, drops props, and even scolds the drummers mid-performance. But this isn't failure. It's satire. It's how communities make fun of their own seriousness. One dancer in a giant helmet mask pretends to miss every beat, then sneaks up behind a drummer and bumps him off his stool. Everyone cheers. The drummer laughs harder than anyone. Fringe theory? Some scholars believe these comic masks were part of a broader system of ritualized social critique, a way for people to comment on leaders, customs, or problems without ever naming names. After all, if it's a spirit doing the mocking, no one gets blamed. Technically. A woman beside you, her arms wrapped in strings of cowrie shells, leans over and whispers, "That tall one's our village chief's favorite. He says the mask reminds him of his cousin who can't dance." She giggles. The chief, standing nearby, pretends not to hear. As the performance continues, you see masks that represent ancestors, fertility, greed, wisdom, even rainfall. Each dance tells a story, sometimes obvious, sometimes confusing, always rich with layers. One mask spins and topples over, then gets up and takes a theatrical bow. Children roar with laughter. Later, you're invited to share in a dish of grilled yam and groundnut sauce. You eat with your fingers and listen to a boy explain that his uncle once wore a mask so convincing, the family didn't realize it was him until he accidentally sneezed. It was the third sneeze that gave him away, the boy says. The first two sounded very wise. Historians still debate whether the comedic elements of masquerade were always present, or if they evolved over time. Some think the humor was secondary to ritual. Others argue that laughter was the ritual, joy as spiritual offering. As dusk falls, the field glows with firelight, and one last masked figure enters. A massive face with lopsided teeth and googly eyes carved in wood. It dances alone, badly, beautifully, spinning until the music stops. Then it bows, dramatically, and waddles away with exaggerated dignity. You exhale, warm and smiling. Because in this culture, even sacred spirits aren't above a little self-parody. The next day begins with birds arguing in the trees, and a rooster who clearly thinks punctuality is a competitive sport. You stretch beneath your mosquito net, brush the red dust off your sleeves, and follow the scent of something frying. Plantains, most likely, or some other golden slice of joy. Today's journey takes you deeper into the green, through humid fields, thick banana groves, and shaded footpaths that meander more than March. You're headed to a village famous not for its scholars or merchants, but for its healers. This is a place where traditional medicine isn't just practice, it's performance. You arrive to find a healer sitting under a raffia-covered hut, surrounded by jars, bones, dried herbs, and one extremely relaxed-looking chicken. She's humming. Not to you, to the roots in her basket. Mainstream historians acknowledge the deep knowledge base held by traditional West African healers, especially in the Sahel and forest zones. They used hundreds of plant species to treat everything from fevers to snakebite, and their work formed the backbone of communal health long before modern hospitals arrived. But what's less talked about is the humor laced into the healing process. The healer waves you over and points to your dusty sandals. "These shoes have seen too much disappointment," she says, and begins laughing before you can even respond. Quirky detail? Some remedies were accompanied by joking rituals, like pretending to bargain with the illness. A healer might say, "I offered this cough a goat, and it still wants rent money," before handing over a herbal drink that smells like eucalyptus and hope. You sip one such brew, which tastes exactly like regret and basil. The healer's apprentice hands you a small cloth bundle filled with dried bark and whispers, "Don't open this. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's hard to refold." Later, a patient arrives with a stomachache. The healer nods solemnly, listens to his complaints, and then smirks. "Your stomach isn't upset. It's disappointed in your dinner choices." She offers him a mixture of bitter leaf and advice. Eat slower, chew more, and stop fighting with your aunt at meals. Fringe theory? Some researchers propose that humor in traditional medicine wasn't just cultural, it was therapeutic. Laughter reduced tension, built trust, and made bitter tonics easier to swallow, metaphorically and literally. In fact, some healing chants were structured like riddles or jokes, inviting the patient to engage, not just endure. Nearby, two children are helping by chasing each other with twigs dipped in palm oil. One falls dramatically, clutching his side. The healer shouts, "That's not an injury, that's theater," and tosses him a mango slice. You lie on a woven mat and watch the shadows drift slowly across the thatched roof. Somewhere behind you, the chicken clucks approvingly. Historians still debate the boundary between medicine and ritual in these systems. Was the healer curing a sickness, or realigning the social fabric around it? Was the plant the remedy, or was the laughter the real medicine? Maybe both. As you stand to leave, the healer hands you a string of beads and says, "These are for protection." "From illness?" you ask. She shakes her head. "From people who take themselves too seriously." You promise to wear them. And maybe, just maybe, you start to feel better already. By now, your feet are coated in so many layers of dust, dye, and wisdom that they've practically earned their own titles, possibly Ambassador of Slightly Crooked Paths, or Envoy of Unexpected Puddles. Either way, you march on, the land now rising into gentle hills speckled with rocky outcrops and long whistling grass. Today, you find yourself approaching one of West Africa's most overlooked innovations, not a building or a marketplace, but a communication system. The talking drums. Before you even see the village, you hear them. Fast, rhythmic, urgent, and just a little bit cheeky. The sound bounces across the valleys like laughter on a trampoline. The villagers are gathered in the square, and at its center, a boy no older than 15 pounds out a rhythm on an hourglass-shaped drum tucked under one arm. The sound speaks. Mainstream historians confirm that drum languages, especially among the Yoruba and Mandi-speaking peoples, could reproduce intonation and pitch patterns of spoken language. Meaning, drummers could speak whole phrases, announcements, even poetry, and send it across long distances in musical Morse code. But the fun part? Drums weren't just practical. They were also performative gossip. You watch as another drummer replies from the far side of the village. It's a conversation, and possibly a roast. You ask what they're saying. Someone nearby translates. "He said the goats are lost again. The reply was, "They heard your singing and ran." Quirky detail: skilled drummers often insert jokes or personal jabs into otherwise routine messages. A famous case involved a trader announcing his wares, only for the drummer to add, "He says his cola nuts are fresh. We remember last week." Fringe theory? Some researchers argue that drum language functioned as early mass media, but with live commentary. Drummers relayed news, but also edited it in real time with rhythm and sarcasm. A community's memory wasn't carved in stone. It danced through the air, spiced with wit. You're handed a practice drum. You strike it. The crowd goes silent. Then someone shouts, "It said, 'My foot has opinions.'" Laughter erupts. Later, you sit with an elder drummer who once served in a royal court. He explains that during ceremonies, drummers might send messages across large compounds, relaying royal commands or birth announcements. But in between official business, we complained about food, or asked if someone remembered the chief's fourth wife's birthday. Apparently, the fourth wife never forgot. You're told the rhythm patterns are complex, with tones rising and falling to mimic the ups and downs of spoken language. "You can't lie through drums," the elder says. "But you can exaggerate." Historians still argue how detailed these messages could be, or whether the jokes were official or improvised. But most agree, the talking drum was part telegram, part theater. As evening settles in, the younger drummers start a performance piece, a retelling of a recent wedding, complete with dramatic flourishes, teases about the groom's dancing, and a closing beat that translates roughly to, "May their arguments be short and their meals hot." You lie back on a smooth rock, the vibrations still echoing in your chest. A drumline shouts from a distant hilltop, "Sleep well, dusty traveler. Your shoes snore." You smile. They're not wrong. By now, you're walking slower, not from exhaustion, but from contentment. The road has loosened your limbs, softened your thoughts, and tuned your ears to the rhythms of a world where knowledge travels in stories, colors, footsteps, and jokes. You're heading west now, into the Senegambian plains, where the savanna stretches wide, and trees cast long, deliberate shadows across the land. The grasses rustle in a lazy sort of applause, and a breeze nudges your thoughts toward something unexpected. Board games. Yes, seriously. You arrive in a small town just as a group of elders sits beneath a baobab tree, gathered around a low wooden board carved with circular hollows. They're playing Wari, also known as Mancala, one of the oldest known games on Earth. But this isn't just play. It's strategy, social bonding, and, like everything else you've encountered, an excuse for some well-timed roasting. Mainstream historians trace Mancala games back over 200 years, spanning East Africa, the Sahel, and even the Middle East and Asia. In West Africa, these games were popular across all levels of society, from royal courts to village gatherings. The game involves scooping and sowing pebbles or seeds, and it's deceptively simple. But those who know, they know. You crouch beside the players. One elder scoops her stones and says with a straight face, "Watch me steal your harvest and your pride." The others holler. Quirky detail? In some villages, Wari wasn't just a game. It was a metaphor for life decisions. Young men might be judged by how well they played, whether they were patient, clever, or easily provoked. A girl watching nearby says, "If he loses all his pieces in 5 turns, he's not managing a household." Fringe theory? Some scholars believe the Mancala board doubled as a teaching tool, not only for math or trade logic, but for diplomacy. The act of losing and winning with grace, of taking risks, of planning multiple steps ahead, these were life lessons disguised as leisure. You're invited to play. You fumble the first few moves. The boy next to you whispers, "You just gave away your entire field." "Did I?" He nods solemnly. We will speak of this for years. The game continues, filled with exaggerated gasps, dramatic scoops, and at least 3 comparisons between a poor move and someone's failed fishing expedition. It's competitive, yes, but also warm. No one storms off, no one flips the board. Even in defeat, players chuckle and say, "My ancestors are watching and shaking their heads." Later, a griot joins the group with a drum and begins telling the history of Wari itself, how ancient kings played it while discussing taxes, how lovers played it to flirt without speaking, how rival chiefs used it to gauge each other's patience before negotiations. And somewhere in the tale, the griot says, "The board does not lie, it only teaches." You watch as one elder carves new holes into a board with slow, practiced strokes. Each pit is perfectly shaped, ready for tomorrow's game, tomorrow's lesson, tomorrow's laughter. Historians still debate where Mancala truly began. Some say Ethiopia, others the Sahel. But most agree, in West Africa, it became more than play. It became practice. You thank the elders and continue down the path. In your pocket, one tiny game seed, smooth and round. A reminder that sometimes the quietest lessons are the most enduring. The road is gentler now, wider, quieter, framed by whispering grasses and trees that bend like they're listening. Your journey is nearly done, and you feel it not just in your feet but in your chest, where a soft kind of stillness has taken root. You reach the banks of a shallow river, slow and wide, the kind that doesn't so much flow as loiter. Villagers sit on the shore washing vegetables, mending nets, or just dipping their toes in the warm current. One child is floating on his back, arms spread wide like he's trying to hug the sky. This is your final stop. A place that's less about commerce or ceremony and more about shared moments. Here, along the river, communities from the old Mali Empire would gather, not just to trade goods or ideas, but to laugh. You're invited to sit beneath a fig tree where a small group of elders has assembled for something that doesn't appear in most textbooks: the evening joke circle. Mainstream historians may highlight Mali's military campaigns, its dazzling trade routes, or its manuscripts. But what they often miss is that this was also a culture that scheduled time for humor. Just as there were griots for history and masks for spirits, there were designated jokers, community members whose role was to poke fun, question norms, and lighten the air. Tonight's jokers are sharp. One woman stands, straight-faced, and says, "I once tried to marry a salt trader. He said I was too spicy." Roars of laughter. Even the goats blink in approval. Quirky detail? Some villages had semi-official fools, not in the court jester sense, but individuals granted special license to mock leadership, traditions, or just whoever brought the worst cassava dish to the festival. These people weren't shunned. They were protected. Humor was sacred. Fringe theory? A few cultural historians argue that this system of public teasing served a civic purpose. By letting people air grievances through satire, communities reduced resentment. It was a form of emotional recycling, turning frustration into comedy, then releasing it into the wind. You're handed a gourd of palm wine and invited to share a joke. You hesitate, then say something about your cooking being so bad, the camels voted you out of the caravan. A pause, then laughter. One elder, wiping tears from his eyes, says, "That's not bad, but you've got competition." He points to a baby chewing on his own sandal. The sun sets in shades of gold and plum. Someone begins singing a low, lilting tune about a donkey who wanted to be a griot. The river gurgles. Crickets take up their usual rhythm. Historians still argue about the boundaries between performance and tradition in these gatherings. Was it ritual or recreation? Wisdom or whimsy? But you? You don't need a theory. You only need this moment, when laughter loops like a drumbeat, when the past breathes not in stone or scroll, but in shared stories and smiling eyes. You lie back, watching the stars stretch awake above you. The villagers continue to joke, tease, sing. A boy begins humming the drum rhythm from yesterday's dance, and everything feels whole. You rest there, warm against the earth, the last orange of the sunset bleeding gently into the dark. The stars above you blink softly, like they're in on the joke. Crickets hum. Somewhere upstream, a frog adds a bass note. Everything moves more slowly now, more patiently. You stretch out, letting your arms relax by your sides, the ground firm and forgiving beneath you. Breathe in, long and low. You can still hear echoes of laughter, gentle, easy, the kind that leaves your chest lighter, not heavier. It's as if the air here remembers every joke, every giggle passed from generation to generation, tucked into songs, dances, marketplaces, and meals. Even the wind carries a smile. The journey behind you wasn't rushed. You moved at the pace of donkeys and stories, and in return, you were given gold. Not the kind you trade, but the kind that stays with you. Wisdom wrapped in wordplay, community built on comedy, peace found in punchlines. Your eyelids drift lower. Every muscle begins to soften, one by one, like pages being gently turned. You are safe here, and known, and most beautifully, included. Let the night take over now. Let the earth hold you. Let the stars blink you softly toward sleep. You've traveled far. You've laughed well. You've earned your rest.